At a recent meeting of government representatives of nations participating in the United Nations Programme of Action, POA, the focus was on tracking of civilian weapons, component parts, and ammunition, and how the United States should spend more money helping foreign countries accomplish those goals. At the second meeting of governmental experts, MGE2, held at the UN headquarters in Manhattan, the globalists discussed a couple of agenda items that should give pause to Americans. First, the delegates at the MGE2 deliberated on how to eliminate the threat of technologically advanced weapons, including so-called polymer firearms and 3D printed guns, as well as the tracking of materials used in the craft production of small arms and light weapons. Not surprisingly, a representative from China called for increased UN-mandated regulations on 3D printers and the weapons they produce. In the chair's summary, the group united in a call for strengthening 3D printing regulations in the context of 3D weapon printing, for ensuring export licenses are in place for 3D printers, for drawing global attention to the need to pay attention to the resale of such printers, and for strengthening controls over 3D printing technology. No one is shocked, of course, that the globalists at the UN want to draw up comprehensive plans to take guns, any and every variety of gun, out of the hands of civilians. After discussing similar strategies to lock down the manufacture, purchase, sale, and transfer of polymer weapons and modular weapons, the next item on the MGE2 attendees' agenda warrants an immediate withdrawal of the United States from the world body. Paragraph 33 of the chair's summary of the meeting calls for urgent tracking of civilian-owned firearms, recommending that manufacturers be forced by the UN to install RFID and biometric technologies in limiting the access to the weapon to authorized users only, with authorized users defined as state actors, UN member nations. That's right. As part of the Programme of Action, the foundation upon which the Arms Trade Treaty is built, the United States has committed to passing legislation that will require domestic firearms and ammunition manufacturers to equip their products with RFID chips and biometric technologies that will help the government slowly but surely disarm civilians. That's not all. At the end of that paragraph, the UN suggests states, member countries, look into combining RFID chips, biometrics, with GPS tracking technologies to be sure to prevent regular people from getting their hands on guns. Next, in the overview of the published summary of the conference, the UN looks to one source to help pay for the implementation of these new disarmament policies: increased foreign aid. Specifically, the unelected, unaccountable UN globocrats call for greater international cooperation and assistance, red, American taxpayer dollars, to offset the massive cost of the transfer of technology and knowledge necessary to make the proposed gun grab a reality. It should be noted that paragraph 42 of the summary proposes funding this fascism through the UN regular budget, 22% of which is paid by the United States, through a process that can be described as nothing less than legalized theft of the wealth of the American worker. As if the point was already made, the document calls for the cultivating of a culture of peace, which is certainly shorthand for flooding the United States with UN-created propaganda linking the civilian ownership of firearms with homicide and other violent crimes. In the wake of the horrific Chattanooga murders, it doesn't take too much foresight to predict a panoply of renewed calls for controlling and regulating civilian access to firearms. Finally, according to the text of the latest draft of the agreement, the POA will serve as an international instrument to enable states to identify and trace, in a timely and reliable manner, the small arms and light weapons that are the subject of the scheme. In practice, this means that the governments of member nations, including the United States, will soon create a massive, all-inclusive database of all parties that manufacture, own, sell, raid, or transfer arms and ammunition. If recent history is a reliable indicator of how such data would be used after the catalogue is complete, Congress could pass a law, or the President could issue an executive order, compelling voluntary surrender of privately owned weapons, ammo, parts, and components, including reloading equipment. If, after a statutorily set window, citizens don't turn in these items to their local law enforcement, then officers will be sent to remind violators of their responsibility under the law to disarm. Paragraph 32 of the Chair's summary lays out the plan for real-time tracking of firearms and ammunition from manufacturer to storage and from storage up to the individual users. Once the governments of the member nations begin tracking and confiscating weapons from civilians, the Programme of Action, paragraphs 30 and 31, mandates that member governments take direct control over transfers of small arms and light weapons. This control will require the federal government to begin stockpiling these items and making a database of the recently impounded guns, bullets, 3D printers, plastics, polymers, and component parts. This database must include the marking, record keeping and tracing of weapons, and in this regard considered barcodes, radio frequency identification, RFID, and biometrics for purposes of electronically identifying stored items, collecting data on them and enabling the data to be entered automatically into record-keeping systems. It is evident from a reading of this latest UN disarmament publication that despite the rhetoric related to promotion of the culture of peace, there are only two reasons the UN is making every effort to disarm the population of the United States: to weaken our sovereignty, and to take from our people their ability to resist those despots, at home and abroad, who would place us under the boot of tyranny and demote us to the ranks of slaves on a sustainable global plantation. The next round of meetings for hammering out the details of the Programme of Action is scheduled for 2016. That gives Americans almost 1 year to convince their representatives in Congress to pass legislation defunding the UN and forcing the world government in waiting to relocate to a more hospitable home. Americans interested in joining this fight are encouraged to look into the John Birch Society, JBS. For nearly 4 decades, the JBS has worked to get US out of the UN. Therefore, the group is uniquely equipped with the resources necessary to finally achieve this urgent aim.